Marvel and DC Chaos, Dumbledore powers unleashed across universes. Episode 61, Rumble. With a series of huge muffled roars, this land that had been frozen for an unknown amount of time was torn apart in a violent tremor. Huge obsidian spikes mixed with green spars shot up into the sky. They were fierce and sharp like giant swords, as if they were about to destroy everything. At this time, a woman's rampant laughter sounded, and it seemed that she was laughing at something. However, in the next second, a dazzling light erupted in the sky. A world-destroying lightning bolt like a heavenly punishment illuminated the entire dimensional fragment, leaving a winding and twisting trace in the dark sky, and instantly hit the tip of an obsidian spike. It was as if the huge obsidian spikes that were indestructible exploded in an instant, turning into countless fragments and jumping in all directions, while smashing other spikes nearby. And this is not over. The thunder punishment is followed by burning at the stake. I saw golden light flickering, and a huge magic array appeared in the sky. With the transformation of a large number of small magic symbols inside, countless giant fireballs suddenly fell from it, smashing downward like a fire rain meteor. For a while, countless dazzling fires burst, and the roar and vibration continued endlessly. The ground world is as if it is being baptized by countless missiles. Inside the green magic shield that vibrated wildly, as if it would shatter at any moment, Hela's eyes were full of shock and anger. She was shocked that the human being was so powerful. It was simply a monster. And the angry one is that he was actually pressed and beaten. Whether it's just underground, or right now on the ground. In an instant, green flames suddenly appeared in Hela's eyes, and one after another runes appeared and peeled off her body, and an extremely huge death force erupted from her body. For her extremely competitive spirit, retaining divine power is an insult to herself and disrespectful to the enemy. At this moment, she no longer thought about how long she could live here after the battle. What she wants. Only win. On the coastline of Bergen, Odin sensed something, and then spoke. Hela burst out with all her divine power. Fiorucci blinked his eyes and asked, "Do you think Russell is in danger?" Odin shook his head, "Not really. In fact, he cares more than this, but Hela. After more than 1,000 years have passed, that enchanted battle suit has long lost its strength in the dimensional fragments and has become fragile by time like ordinary clothes, so the current strength has always been maintained by Hela's own divine power. That is to say, once the divine power is too little. Although it may be a little bad to think this way as an old father, he is also powerless in the face of Asgard's true fate. Moreover, it may not be his daughter who suffers." Odin glanced at Gui without a trace, and smiled disdainfully in his heart. What was it to defeat me 1,000 years ago, and now I am indeed more powerful? High in the sky, Russell looked down and took in Hela's changes. "Is this girl crazy? I don't really want you to call me daddy." And at this moment, he saw a green magic array appear under Hela's feet. In the next second, this magic array spun rapidly and expanded, and did not stop until it expanded to thousands of meters. Hela looked up at the sky and looked at Russell and sneered. Projection. In an instant, countless obsidian daggers, burning with green flames, shot out from the ground. From afar, it looks like a dense rain of green light flying from the ground to the sky. Russell did not make a magic shield defense, but disappeared the moment the light rain approached, and then instantly appeared behind Hela. The position of more than 10 meters with the other party as the center of the circle is a safe zone, and there is no dagger ejected. The next second, Russell lifted his finger. Faint. The stun spell output from the huge magic power hit Hela, who suddenly stiffened and fell forward. But Russell stepped back. Because Hela's soul had already jumped out and attacked him with the green flame sword in both hands. This is Asgard's unique astral projection. It's also the only magic that Hela specializes in. At this moment, Hela, who turned into a spirit state, was extremely fast, like a phantom stabbing towards Russell. And it's more than that. The magic array on the ground did not stop because Hela fainted, but still kept shooting daggers entwined with flames. That is to say, Russell continues to retreat and dodge, and he will be attacked by the dagger that continues to spawn. Hela had a sneer on her face. She did all this to get the other party close to her. This is a trap. The next moment, she saw that Russell had indeed stopped. But not only did she not see the imaginary panic on the other party's face, but she showed a smile to herself. Syllable. Russell snapped his fingers. I don't know when the suspension ring that appeared on the other hand was suddenly activated, and in an instant, a series of circular portals appeared in the sky. In an instant, hundreds of flame daggers disappeared into the portal, and then all of them fell from another portal. And this portal is above Hela's body. Get back to the other in the way of the other. The powerful perception brought by the spirit body made the smile on Hela's face freeze. She glanced at Russell angrily, and then the entire spirit body suddenly turned into a green halo and instantly returned to her body. Her plan failed. In fact, she didn't think that this sword could stab Russell at all. She did all this in order to make Russell think that in this situation he would find a good opportunity to use that disgusting spatial movement spell to move next to her fallen body, and then do it to her powerless self. At that time, she can rely on the fact that the spirit body can instantly return to the body to attack the defenseless Russell. But she failed. The other party just moved her fingers, and her plan was in vain, and she had to go back. In an instant, Hela opened her eyes. As the invisible fluctuations emanated, the daggers that poured down towards her turned into green flames and then submerged into her body. More than that. The magic array on the ground disappeared at this time, and the daggers in the sky that were still flying upwards also turned into flames and returned to her body. A green flame armor appeared on Hela. Although very imposing, at this moment Hela felt that she had basically lost. This was a man who was tougher than all the mages she had ever seen combined. All of the opponent's magic forced her to defend, and her own attacks were almost completely ineffective. However, she will not stop fighting even if she dies. But at this moment, Hela was stunned, and an incomprehensible look appeared in her eyes. She saw that a pair of flame armor was also condensed on that mage's body. "Are you taunting me?" Hela shouted angrily. Russell shook his neck and moved, then stretched out a finger and shook it from side to side. "Nope. It's just that you are still so energetic and plan to fight quickly. And you are Odin's daughter, how can I do it if he doesn't kill you? So, thinking about it, I think I can only completely convince you." Episode 62. Hearing these domineering words, Hela not only did not get angry, but also showed an excited smile on her face. "To be honest, if it weren't for this situation, I would definitely be interested in you." In her previous war-filled life, the men she met were either trembling with fear, dying under her sword, or just being far away from trickery. And the people of Asgard are even more afraid of her. This also caused her to look down on all men except her father Odin. And now the other party has given up the advantage and claimed to subdue himself. Hela stared at Russell and licked her lips, the corners of her mouth gradually hooked, revealing a sense of enchantment against the background of the dark green flames. "I hope your body is as hard as what you say, and you won't be shattered by my blow. I still want to see you bow down and call me queen." Russell didn't speak, hooked his finger. Hela seized the moment at this moment and threw the flame-long sword in his hand hard, like a wheel of fire breaking through the air. At the same time, with a strong step under his feet, the ground instantly exploded into cracks, and his body shot out like a cannonball to keep up. Russell didn't move in place, just opened his eyes slightly, and suddenly electric light shot out, shattering the long sword that had flown in front of him. In the next second, the power of the bull charm and the power of the rabbit charm burst out. Russell instantly possesses unmatched power and speed. He clenched his fist and swung out, pulling out a smash in front of him. A point, no more, no less. This punch was perfectly timed and hit Hela right at the moment. Even at this moment, it was as if the other party deliberately used his body to receive this punch. In an instant, the air exploded, making a popping sound. The flame armor on Hela's body exploded into a large piece, and her body tumbled backwards and flew out. But Hela, as a powerful warrior who has been fighting for thousands of years, has a wealth of combat experience. The moment her body flew backwards, the spirit body had already flown out. However, before she could even condense the flame sword in her hand, she saw tiny golden magic arrays appear on Russell's left hand, as if forming a golden hand armor. The next moment, a Sunran smile appeared under Russell's flame helmet, and he leaned forward with the left palm of the golden armor, strangling Hela's neck deadly. Then the ground shook violently. Russell's body turned into a flame afterimage, against a green streamer, rushing after Hela's flesh. In the next second, he slammed his left hand hard. Not only did Hela's spirit body penetrate into his body, but at the same time, the huge force also slammed the other party to the ground. Hela sank into the shattered ground, only feeling a pain in her chest and back. And when she opened her eyes, she was right in front of the pair of golden electric eyes that looked down on her. Russell straddled it, without any pity for the idea of cherishing Jade, and thunder wrapped around his right fist and slammed down. Rumble. In an instant, the green flame exploded. The ground centered on Hela collapsed again, rapidly spreading out a large crack like a spider's web. Russell didn't intend to stop, but when he wanted to fall again, he saw a pair of annoyed eyes. A green flower of flame blooms on the ground. The next moment, a violent and terrifying explosion of divine power instantly knocked Russell into the air. Immediately afterwards, a dark green figure quickly caught up. Hela imprisoned Russell with both hands, and the next moment he hit him headlong with a helmet with hideous antlers. Bang! Russell used the demonic fire to compress the condensed helmet and shattered in half, and the entire upper body also leaned back. This inspired his ferocity. At this time, Hela wanted to release her arms, but found that she couldn't get rid of them at all, and was firmly grabbed by the other party in an instant. The next moment, Russell's head was raised back again, and he also hit back with a head mallet. The sound of shattering suddenly appeared, and Hela's antler helmet was all shattered, and the whole person suddenly fell into a brief dizziness. When she came back to her senses, she found that the situation between the two sides was reversed, and she was imprisoned by the other party with both arms. Whoops! Suddenly, the sound of chains swimming sounded, and a chain of burning flames entangled the two of them. And at this time, seeing Russell showing a malicious smile, Hela's face changed suddenly, and her heart became extremely uneasy. She wanted to break out and struggle with all her might, but it was too late. The perspective is rapidly zoomed out. At this moment, looking at the sky from afar, I saw a huge red-green entangled fireball like a meteorite falling from the sky, setting off a terrifying airflow and hitting the ground vertically. In an instant, the rule of sound seemed to have been lost in the entire dimensional fragment. A round of red and green sun rose from the ground, and then turned into a terrible storm and swept around. Patches of pine needle forests are pulled out of the ground and rolled backwards, the frozen lake surface breaks and melts, and the shallow layer of the frozen earth turns into a swamp. Until the last air flow becomes no longer powerful, blows towards the floating gravel belt, passes through it and dissipates. The aurora-like night scenery in the sky has been restored again, but the terrain below has been completely destroyed. In the huge crater, Russell stood up with a slight gasp, and the flame armor on his body also dissipated. In fact, his melee combat ability can be one step closer, but he doesn't want to do that, otherwise it will be funny if he can't contain a holy sword and hack Hela to death. At this time, Russell looked at Hela trapped in the rubble and found that the other party had fallen into a coma. But Russell's old face turned red. This Asgard's combat suit is really not strong, or Thor's enchanted metal armor is handsome and strong. Don't overdo it, Russell waved his hand casually, and suddenly a cape covered the other party. With the power of the dog charm, soon all the scratches on Russell's body disappeared, and his state gradually recovered. After thinking about it, Russell pointed his finger at Hela's head. A few seconds later, the healed Hela's face turned red and slowly opened her eyes. You win. Hela didn't get up, her lowered eyes a little dim. She thought she would lose, but she didn't think she would lose so completely. Whether it's magic or melee. The other party completely defeated her fearlessness with an unbelievable posture and crushed her pride. Hela pulled down her cloak and pointed to her heart. Kill me, as a victor you should take out the victory fruit, the other half of the dimensional fragment core is in my heart. She is never afraid of death, and dying in battle at the hands of a strong man is already the best result. It's better than dying of old age here as your divine power runs out. But Russell got into trouble. What is this? Russell scratched his head, how could he really kill Hela? No matter what the intention, or just reluctant to give up his daughter, Odin's old man didn't start until he died. As for saying that you can't beat it when you're old? It's okay to deceive others, how can he believe it? One of the characteristics of the Aes God clan is that its strength increases with age. That is, the older this gang gets, the more powerful they are. Russell sighed and began to wonder if he wanted to exchange Odin for a reward. A few minutes later, Hela, who had been waiting for her life to return, opened her eyes with a frown. After seeing Russell's embarrassed expression, Hela was slightly stunned. You don't want to kill me? Nonsense. Russell said angrily. Hela was silent for a moment, then suddenly stood up and said to Russell in a tough tone, hook the magic in the body, now. What for? Russell asked warily. Hela looked up slightly. Aren't you asking for the other half of the dimensional fragment core? I don't have divine power to take it out now, I need to rely on yourself. Hearing this, Russell showed a hint of joy, and immediately followed Hela's request to hook the magic in his body, and then asked, what's next? I'll do it next. Saying that, Hela raised her hand and pulled Russell over a confused look. A few seconds later, Russell swallowed half of the dimensional fragments and looked at Hela in front of him even more confused. Then his face turned red at a speed visible to the naked eye. That one. I'm going home for dinner, so I won't bother you. Again, goodbye. Russell stumbled to finish the sentence, then turned his head and left. Then he felt that he was choked by the neckline of his clothes and could not breathe. Behind him, Hela pulled Russell's back of the shirt, raised her head proudly like a queen, and the corners of her mouth were slightly hooked. Want to go? Episode 63. I don't know how long it will be. Russell looked at the brilliant aurora in the sky, and his head was still glowing. Is something wrong with me, or is she wrong? Why didn't you resist? Shouldn't it? Suddenly, Russell saw a Q version of his own demon villain jump out of front of his eyes. The other party has two horns on his head, holds a fork in one hand, and pinches his waist with the other. It's not your fault, the power of the Queen of Asgard is so great, it's normal that you can't resist. The devil's words could not be believed, and Russell wanted to hear the other person's comments. So an angelic villain with wings on his back and a divine ring on his head jumped out, and his little head nodded vigorously. Yes, yes. Tender and delicious? What a devil evaluation is this? Russell's face turned pale and stepped out of the green vortex, and then glanced at Odin with some weakness. Seeing that the other party's expression was natural, there was nothing abnormal, and he was immediately relieved. Just after merging the two halves of the dimensional core, a will he felt dissipated from the inside, and then he found that he could freely open this dimensional fragment. He didn't directly release Hela, and the other party didn't mean it, and he didn't know what he was thinking. After thinking about it, Russell looked at Odin and said in a very normal tone, Odin, I fought Hela, the goddess of death, in the dimensional fragments, resulting in almost no divine power left in her. I sensed that if she didn't get added, her next state would probably not be very good. You don't even want to call me father-in-law. Odin was in a very good mood and rarely complained in his heart. But he didn't poke it either. In case Russell ran away with a thin skin, wouldn't it be a loss? Odin showed a gentle smile and said, Thank you Master Russell for your concern, but how can I, a father, watch my daughter die? Saying that, Odin raised his palm, and the golden filamentous divine power condensed an amber spar in the center of the palm. I'm afraid Hela is still resentful that I sealed her inside the dimensional fragment, so the divine power crystallization troubled you to hand it over to her for me. Saying that, Odin handed the spar to Russell. Very reasonable. Russell nodded to indicate that it was not troublesome at all. Gooey on the side blinked, and she suddenly felt that the atmosphere between these two was a little wrong. Odin is too kind, right? Even she felt that the other party probably didn't smile so much at Thor. But after thinking about it, she didn't guess why. A few minutes later, a rainbow bridge fell from the sky to take Odin away. Russell and Koichi returned to Karmatage. Due to more than a dozen battles in the past few days, Russell felt that even the dog charm could not relieve his fatigue, and planned to go back directly to rest. I won't go to the library today, give myself a day off. But at this time, Fiorucci asked him to wait. After a while, Fiorucci handed Russell a fist-sized regular dodecahedron. Russell took it in his hand and found that there was a flame burning quietly inside, but it showed no special features. He looked up at Koichi, who explained, This is the contract snatched from Mephisto last time, and there is power from the spirit of vengeance, even if you kill the reward of the Black Heart demon. But you don't have to worry, the contract and negative effects in it have been eliminated by me looking for someone else. After saying that, Gooey opened the portal, and he didn't know where he went again. What a busy man, Russell sighed and came to the cultivation room of the New York sanctuary. The dimensional core needs to be refined slowly and is not in a hurry, but the power of the spirit of vengeance can be directly absorbed. In the quiet room, Russell opened the dodecahedral seal layer by layer, until after the last layer of prohibition was lifted, the flames inside swelled violently to the size of a fireball. The next moment, the flame instinctively wanted to flee. But Russell only moved his mind and used his ability to manipulate the flame to force the flame to fly back. Then he gently opened his mouth and inhaled, and suddenly, the flames were swallowed into his stomach like flowing water. And this is just the appearance, the real situation is that his spirit body is rapidly absorbing flames, decomposing into primordial power to be absorbed. More than half an hour later, Russell suddenly opened his eyes. At this time, his eyeballs could not see much, replaced by two crimson flames. This is the Eye of Judgment. Any sin under the gaze of these eyes will be burned by the hellfire and the soul will scream to death. In the next second, Russell created a small teleportation array and reached out to take out a short sword from Karmatage's arsenal. He lightly tapped his finger on it, and suddenly a trace of flame attached to it, and spread rapidly. And the whole long sword began to twist under the flames, gradually becoming hideous. The originally square sword turned into a sinister skeleton, the sword body was covered with red fire patterns, and behind the blade, a blood trough appeared as if the evil ghost had bitten it. The whole flaming fire sword seemed to come from Hellforge. This is the power of demonization. The flame of the spirit of vengeance can demonize all non-living beings and become more powerful. After a simple experiment, Russell recalled all the flames, and suddenly all visions disappeared. Phew, Gooey is really generous, give me all this thing. Strength has never been too much, let alone such a powerful ability. After resting for a while, Russell returned to the castle next door to fall asleep. After all, the previous war was really tired. Under the endless starry sky, an ancient palace sits in the void, as if it lasts forever. I don't know when Gui's figure suddenly appeared. The next moment the starlight flowed, and a humanoid mysterious existence that seemed to be composed of countless galaxies landed in front of Gui. Seeing this, Gui bowed his head slightly, not daring to look directly, his eyes full of humility. Did he get something? The mysterious being asked suddenly. Gu nodded. He got the gift of the world tree and the dimensional fragments. The mysterious being nodded. That's good, I hope he can really surprise me. But do you think he'll really fight Sidhorn in the future? Fiorucci neither nodded nor shook his head. I'm not sure. But since he has Scarlet Witch with him, if he wants to protect the other party in the future, he will inevitably oppose Sidhorn. And from my observation of him, he will not give up his companion. And he's really perfect to become the Lord of the Magic Dimension. Of course, even if he doesn't do it, he will become a supreme mage better than me and a qualified successor. The mysterious being nodded. Just let everything be, remember not to force him. I know. Gu nodded. Of course she would not force Russell. At first, she just wanted to help Strange find a helper, but later found that it was better for the other party to be a supreme mage. Later, after discovering the other party's terrifying magical talent and special spirit strength, he had the idea of making the other party the master of the magic dimension. But the road is long, and now it is just an attempt. If Russell didn't want to, then she wouldn't force anything. After thinking about it, Gui said, Do you need me to bring him to you? The mysterious being shook his head. It's too early, and the death side hasn't been very calm lately. Yes, Lord Eternal. Guishing saluted and disappeared from the ancient palace again. P.S. Many people think that the backstage of Gui is Vessendi, but in fact it is not. The Eternity of the Five Gods is the boss of Gui, and Sidhorn is considered by Eternity to be the cancer of the universe. In fact, I don't want to write about the above eternal paragraph earlier, but some readers greatly feel that the ancient pair of protagonists are good and illogical, so I explained a little, which is a long-term main line. Episode 64, the next day. In the early morning, Russell refreshed to send the dimensional fragment to send the divine power crystal, and did not come out of it with a pale face until noon. When he thought of the other party letting himself call the queen again, he was angry and didn't fight anywhere. Next time I have to let you call me Dad. After saying a cruel word, Russell teleported into S.H.I.E.L.D. and sat down on the couch. Nick Fury, who was adjusting the task, was stunned, and quickly lowered his head, afraid to see something. Russell, who fell into the sage mode, did not pay attention to the eyes of the halogen egg, and asked directly, Has our hip captain made any moves in the past 2 days? Nick Fury quickly put down the tablet and replied with a straight face. He was inquiring recently about where Captain Carter lives. Russell almost laughed when he heard this. He lied to the other party Carter Page that he was abused by Bucky's second personality, just to see if this product would sneak to find an old lover. Unexpectedly, the thick eyebrows and big eyes, it seems that the serious Steve really didn't hold back. As for why the other party didn't find the two in S.H.I.E.L.D., he had already explained to Nick Fury. Once Steve discovers that Carter Page and Bucky cannot be found in S.H.I.E.L.D., he says that the two have been working secretly at the secret base due to the serum. After all, those two people were made with transfiguration at that time, and they didn't really exist. However, for now, Russell feels that since he has returned, he can carry out the next plan and start harvesting the plot of the American team to change the exchange point. It just so happens that the war is too tired these days, and you can also be happy. Russell laughed while thinking, and watched Nick Fury, who was sitting behind his desk, bristle. He knew that the American team was going to be unlucky again. But immediately, he also turned pale, and saw Russell come up and grab his shoulder. But it's not about practice. A few seconds later, the two appeared in a nursing home and arrived at Carter Page's room. The legendary agent of the last century could not get up at this time, and the wrinkles on her face and dull eyes all indicated that this woman would not live long. Nick Fury, you still look so spirited. Carter Page said tremblingly, before turning to look at Russell. Who is this young man? Nick Fury quickly introduced. This is the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D., but it has not yet been made public, and only agents above level 7 know about it. Hearing this, Carter Page suddenly showed surprise. She knew how powerful Nick Fury was, but she didn't expect to be a young man's subordinate now, which made her feel a strong sense of unreality. And Nick Fury's next sentence almost made her heartbeat pause. Under the leadership of the director, the Hydra hidden in S.H.I.E.L.D. has all been removed, including Dr. Zola's intelligent consciousness. 9. Groove. Nick Fury burst into a foul mouth, but he didn't expect that his words almost stimulated the other party to death, and quickly brought the oxygen mask to Carter. But just then, he saw his chief leaning against Carter Page's ear and saying, "Steve Rogers is alive." Dee, heart rate monitoring directly becomes a line. Carter Page didn't hold on this time, snapped his head, and died on the bed. Nick Fury was even more anxious and panicked to open the AED in the house for first aid. After a few seconds, he held back a tremor and pressed 2 electrodes up and down Carter Page's chest. And just as he finished setting the current and was about to press the switch, a young female voice reminded him, "Nick Fury, you installed the 2 electrodes backwards." "Oh, thanks for the reminder." Fack. Nick Fury glanced sideways, and the next moment he screamed and threw the instrument in his hand, feeling that his soul almost ascended to heaven. He saw Carter Page's soul floating in midair. "Look at how unproductive you are." Russell glanced at the egg and then said to Carter, "Do you want to reunite with Steve?" Hearing this, Carter suddenly became excited. This is simply her lifelong dream. Even with her soul by the other party's side, she is willing. However, this was obviously impossible, and after a while, she felt more and more cold, and it was obvious that she could not last long with her soul. "So what's the cost, Chief?" "There is no free lunch under the sky," Carter Page asked directly. Russell smiled. "Don't be so serious, I just want you to act in a play." Carter was stunned, this seemed too simple. But the more she listened to Russell's description, her eyes lit up. That dance was more than 80 years late, and it really should be punished properly. The next day, Steve is running around Central Park to vent his irritability. His good brother and his lover are married, and he can still accept it. But the good brother has 2 personalities, and one of them will also be domestic violence, which makes him unacceptable. "On your left." At this time, a figure huffed and ran past him. Steve's face suddenly showed an excited look. It was Bucky who had just passed. He quickly accelerated, but was pulled further and further away. "On your left." After a lap, Bucky immediately shouted again, and then walked away. It took 7 or 8 laps before Bucky stopped beside his junior brother, and then gasped while saying, "Go to my house tonight, Carter made apple pie." Steve suddenly felt a tingling in his heart. He remembered that Carter had said 2 days ago that apple pie was Bucky's favorite. But for Carter's sake and getting the address, Steve still squeezed a smile out of his face and agreed. In the evening, Steve found the house by the address and rang the doorbell. As the door opened and he saw the face he had been thinking about day and night again, Steve suddenly felt an impulse. But in the end, he just shook his fists silently, still didn't say anything, smiled politely, and walked into the room. The next meal, Steve was sitting on pins and needles. Looking at the loving laughter and joke of the 2 people on the other side, he only felt that the apple pie in his mouth was bitter. Then the more Steve thought about it, the more angry he became, and he ate Bucky's apple pie. Then he almost vomited blood. Carter saw that the apple pie on Bucky's plate was gone, so he changed his share to Bucky, and smiled sweetly. "This is not over," and then Bucky asked with a curious look, "Hey, Steve, why didn't you jump off the plane in the first place? The invisible blade is the deadliest." Steve was almost stabbed to death by a sword of these 80 years of skill. But in the end of the day, he still came hard. Nick Fury sent an order at night to work at the secret base as well. The next day, Steve arrived at the underground base early and brought 2 handmade breakfasts. He remembered that Peggy used to love the sandwiches he made. He waited expectantly, but he didn't see the other party until noon. Just when Steve thought Carter Page would not show up today, he saw the other person walk into the office with sunglasses and a thick mask on his face. Steve was struck by lightning. She was beaten again. "How so? Is it because I went to dinner yesterday? But was that what Bucky invited me to?" But the next second, he reacted again, and that second personality did not invite himself. At this moment, Steve wanted to go over to comfort, but he was afraid of stimulating Carter's self-esteem. And just like that, Steve spent the whole day in a daze. Until the evening, he received a text message from Bucky. Steve thought it would be Bucky's second personality warning him, but he didn't expect it to be at all. The text messages were full of words that made his scalp tingle. Inside the office, Nick Fury stumbled. "So Chief, your plan is, make Carter like Bucky, Bucky like Steve, and then Steve like Carter? What a great idea. What kind of punishment can the devil think of? Simply amazing." Nick Fury silently mourned Steve in his heart. "You said you woke up, what kind of punch?" Russell waved his hand. "Don't worry, just exercise Steve's willpower, I'm all for his good." 3 days later, Steve stood under a bridge, quietly waiting for Bucky. He has already made a decision to agree to Bucky's request to go away in order for Carter not to be beaten in the future. What is it to suffer a little yourself? Carter is happy. Not long after, Steve suddenly felt like he was looking to the left. Then he saw Bucky standing stunned in place, dozens of meters away, his eyes full of disbelief. After more than 10 seconds, it turned into incomparable joy and excitement, and then he accelerated and ran and hugged himself hard. Do you want to hold it so tightly? Steve felt like he could even feel Bucky's heartbeat, but couldn't break free. And he remembered that the text message sent to him last night had a request. That is, after meeting today, you must kiss each other to show your determination. Thinking of this, Steve gritted his teeth and pouted with his eyes closed. Click, click, click. Bang. Steve felt a sharp pain in his face and then fell to the ground. He opened his eyes and looked over with confusion, and found that Bucky was still holding his fist motion, and his face was shocked and scared at this time. What are you doing, X2? The two asked in unison. Bucky's heart was beating violently, and his heart was full of fear. He was released after apologizing to Tony Stark this morning, and then accidentally learned that his good brother was not dead and rushed over. But I didn't expect that the other party wanted to plot against him. I take you as a good brother, you actually want to sleep with me. And Steve is even more puzzled, isn't this all you asked for? Just then, he heard a slapping sound. Steve turned to see Director Russell coming out of the bushes, patting the dust on his body and putting his cell phone in his pocket. Suddenly, Steve remembered that he seemed to hear the sound of taking pictures when he pouted just now. Chief, you shouldn't have a camera on that phone, right? Steve asked tremblingly. Russell suddenly showed whether you looked down on me. You're lonely. My phone is for the director's exclusive, 1.2 billion pixels, to take pictures. Episode 65, This is Emo? Russell shook his phone and said, Captain Hip, how do you say I hung the high-definition photos I just took in the lobby on the first floor of the Trident building? This time, not only Steve, but Bucky was also scared pale. If this is passed on, you won't have to be a human after it gets out. Steve and Bucky look at each other. It's all to blame on you, X2. Upon hearing this, Bucky became even more angry and said angrily, What the hell were you doing just now? How did you change your sexual orientation after decades of freezing? If I hadn't reacted quickly, you would have succeeded. Steve responded equally angrily, Didn't you threaten me last night that I had to kiss today? Last night? Bucky showed a speechless expression and shouted, I was still locked up in S.H.I.E.L.D. prison last night, and now I don't have a cell phone. What text message will I send you? Hearing this, Steve was stunned all of a sudden, and after a few seconds, he seemed to think of something, trembling. You didn't marry Carter, didn't hit her? Bucky immediately replied, What are you kidding? How can I like Carter Page? Marriage beating is even more outrageous. Hearing this, Steve understood it all at once. Everything I saw before was fake, and I was deceived. For a moment, Steve didn't know whether to be happy or disappointed. Happily, it was all fake before, but good brother Bucky is indeed alive, and it looks like he was indeed injected with super serum. Sadly, Carter Page finally didn't wait for his dance. As for the previous fake Bucky and Carter Page, he didn't think much of it. He has seen a lot of high-tech in the past few days, and he should be one of them. But at this point, he can be sure of one thing. That is the director's small heart. Fortunately, I didn't hit that punch at that time, otherwise I would definitely have kissed it today. However, Steve Rogers will not admit defeat. Team America stood up from the ground and looked up at Russell. Director Russell, I'm sorry, but I want to get those pictures back. Don't worry, I'll start lighter. After speaking, he made a look at Bucky. Let's go up and catch him. Saying that, Steve was about to raise his leg, but seeing Bucky not moving in place and looking at himself like a fool, he suddenly stopped again. Let's go together, Bucky. Don't let the photos go viral. Steve said with an anxious look. Bucky touched his chest and revealed a reluctant smile. That I suddenly think that the photo is actually nothing. Anyway, I'm not the one who pouts, it doesn't matter. Steve's mind was delicate, and he immediately understood that Bucky should have suffered a loss at the hands of the director. He was suddenly a little surprised. Russell looked weak, but he didn't expect to be able to fight. But that's okay. He can hit a hit like this. I can fight like this for a day. Steve looked at the other self, who suddenly appeared in front of him with a confused expression, and rushed over after shouting a slogan. For a while, the two Steves fought hard together. However, although they look exactly the same, it is easy to distinguish between real and fake. Because there is a person who specifically greets the next 3 ways. More than an hour later, Steve knocked down the fake in front of him for the 32nd time. But in the next second, the fake American team immediately got up from the ground again, and once again said in a serious manner, I can fight like this for a day. Steve wants to cry without tears, this fake is my word. This time, he finally felt how helpless his enemies were before. This sentence is so annoying. Finally, another hour later, the real Steve was punched to the ground. But this time, exhausted, he couldn't get up at all. It turns out that he is bragging for one day, and the real situation can only play for 2 hours. Seeing this, Russell revoked the fake American team, turned off the video, and put away his mobile phone. Welcome Captain Buttocks to continue the challenge next time. After speaking, Russell directly left with a phantom transfiguration in the shocked eyes of Steve and Bucky. Bucky took a deep breath, and he suddenly realized that the power he had seen in the other party before was just the tip of the iceberg. The gap is too big, and Bucky is not jealous. At this time, he turned his head to look at Steve lying on the ground, and suddenly laughed and ridiculed. To be honest, it's the first time I've found your ass so upturned. I can see that you pay attention to this aspect. Steve rolled his eyes, then rolled over. At this time, suddenly the sound of high heels stepping on the concrete floor suddenly sounded. After a few breaths, Steve saw a woman in uniform with a familiar face smiling and looking down at herself. Steve suddenly felt a little angry in his heart, and said coldly, "Fake, you still want to lie to me?" The smile on Carter Page's face froze, and then gradually became cold. In the next second, he directly kicked 2 birds with high heels. Due to the fatal blow, Steve suddenly distorted his expression, covered his body with both hands, and arched into a prawn. Seeing this, Bucky next to him was about to go over to attack, but then a voice suddenly sounded. It was Russell who was back. He looked at Steve and said in a tone that he suddenly remembered, "By the way, Captain, I forgot to tell you, the Carter Page you met these days is herself." "Oh, you guys met you. Bye-bye." After speaking, Russell left directly. The atmosphere under the bridge suddenly became silent. Bucky silently looked up at the bottom of the bridge, as if there was something nice to see there. Steve, on the other hand, kept his mouth shut and looked at the angry Carter Page with pain. "It's true? Then why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Deliberately, must be deliberate." Steve turned over again in pain, and suddenly felt that he must not provoke the chief in the future, otherwise he really couldn't stand to come like this again. "Fortunately, I injected the serum myself, otherwise this one will definitely disperse." Back at the Supreme Sanctuary, Russell snickered again. He actually had a big gift for Steve. Although Carter Page looks no different from a living person, the body used in his realization is a clay transformation enchanted doll, which is extremely hard. However, Russell felt that according to Steve's personality, it should be discovered a few days later, but unfortunately he couldn't see the other party's expression at that time, which must be very interesting. Of course, Russell is not a stingy person either. When you have the opportunity to get the reality gem in the future, you can help Carter transform into a human body. Then Russell, who was in a good mood, chatted with Wong for a while before returning home. He's about to start a new card draw. The previous change of Hela battle gained 1800 exchange points, and the plot naturally changed in the past few days to gain 400 points. Coupled with the convergence of the 3 of Steve just now, he once again gained 1600 points. Now he has a total of 3800 redemption points and has 3 chances to draw cards. As always, Russell blessed Wanda first. Don't care if the probability is modified or not, anyway, he is much more comfortable in his heart. And then, for the first time, psychopath character cards. For the second time, the vegetative patient character card. Russell suddenly felt a little numb. Is it true that Krypton does not change his life, and Xian does not save it? After thinking about it, Russell sneaked a trip to the dimensional fragments. After using up all his obscurity, he started a new card draw. Next second. On the blue sky background panel, a purple meteor crashed to the ground. As the fog dissipated, a man holding a magic staff and revealing purple magic power in his eyes stood in place, exuding a powerful momentum. Purple Epic. Character card, Son of Egwene, Guardian of the Legend of Azeroth, Astral Mage, Medivan. Episode 66, Astral Mage Medivan. Russell was stunned for a moment. He though knows that this character is from World of Warcraft. But at that time, the game was too burdensome for him as a student party, and the money for the internet fee and the point card fee combined was too burdensome, so he played it a few times and gave up. So I don't know much about this role. However, with the experience of the purple epic card Saint Lord, he guessed that Medivan was definitely not weak. At this time, there were still more than 800 exchange points, and Russell did not hesitate to start the simulation. 44 years before the first year of World of Warcraft, you were born in Stormwind City. Because your mother is the Guardian Egwene, and your father is the Archmage Elon, you inherited the bloodline of the two, and you are extremely talented in magic. Similarly, the soul of Sagrath, the Lord of the Burning Legion, hidden in Egwene's body, has also been transferred to your body. At the age of 14, you clashed with Sagras, because you couldn't control the hidden power in your body, causing the release of energy in your body and accidentally killing your father. 20 years old, you have been in a coma for 6 years, you woke up, but you have been affected by Sagras, and your will is soaked in darkness. At the age of 28, you traveled to Karazhan and met the orcs on a spiritual journey. Under the unobtrusive guidance of Sagrath, you secretly helped Delano invade Azeroth. Your mother discovered the truth and traveled with the blue dragon to Karazhan to prevent a greater catastrophe. At this time, you have been completely possessed by Sagras, killed the blue dragon instantly, and then awakened by your mother Egwene with magic. You take Kotka as an apprentice. Once again, you are corrupted and killed by Khadgar, and Sagrath is driven back into the twisted void. Years later, your mother learned the truth and resurrected you with all her power. As an astral mage, you turn into a crow, become a hidden prophet, and silently guard this world in secret. The simulation has ended here, although there are few words on the system, but as a first-hand experiencer, Russell's eyes are only shocked. Unlike Constantine, who is accustomed to the selfishness of pit people, astral mage Medivan is a true guardian. He has been fighting Sagras all his life, with faults and credits. After the resurrection, he still shuttles through the unknown darkness, warning of disasters and solving crises. After quietly digesting some of the accompanying emotions, Russell looked at the reward given by the system. This simulation is successful. Congratulations to the host for obtaining Medivan's 3% ability value. The simulation value of one time is actually less than that of the Holy Lord. That being said, Russell had only surprise in his eyes. Because the fewer simulations, the more powerful the representative characters. Power loading, mana 3%, magical knowledge 3%, spell, lightning storm, spell, arcane missile, spell, silence, spell, invisibility, spell, group teleportation, spell, ice gun technique, spell, flaming storm. As the power fused into the body, Russell's face showed surprise. He didn't expect that only 3% would have so many more magic skills. While stealth and group teleportation are a bit tricky, the other skills are pretty good. There is no need to mention the rest of the mana, magic knowledge is too precious. Russell can not only touch the bypass, but also contains a lot of alchemical knowledge, such as activating life, arcane puppets, and the like. Without hesitation, Russell consumed the rest of the points and ran 7 simulations again. 21% mana allowed him to increase again, and his knowledge of magic made him more intelligent. Spells get a whole bunch again. Fireball, burning, flame shock, flame explosion, ice arrow, frost nova, blizzard, magic blast, flame enchantment, ice enchantment, lightning enchantment, and more. Again, don't look at these skills, themselves are not so powerful. But in his hands, as he gets stronger, these skills will also multiply and become stronger geometrically. For example, in a blizzard, if Medivan can only summon to cover one town, then at this time, Russell's full release can cover the whole of New York. In the future, it can even cover a state, or even an entire planet, or even an exaggerated entire galaxy. Of course, the back belongs to Russell's ambition. After all, people always have to dream. It's worthy of a purple character card. Just 24% of the power is a great improvement for me. Silently, Russell raised his palm, and suddenly there were flames and ice chasing each other inside, very harmonious. Now his control of magic has gone up another notch. Russell had a hunch that when this control reached a certain level, he could learn some dimensional demon god spells. For example, the Sacred Sword of Vishan Emperor, the Cetalak Crimson Belt, and so on. He can completely modify it and use his magic to unleash spells. Call. Russell exhaled a long breath, not in a hurry. Steadily, at least grow to the Heavenly Father level strength of Ancient One Odin. In the afternoon, Russell woke up from a meditative state. He walked outside, and Wanda was lying on the lawn holding a magic book written by Russell. The book is full of basics, and he was going to send it to Tony, but Wanda cut it off first. Russell had no intention of letting Wanda live as a normal person, and no one could make decisions for the girl. Since Wanda still wants to be a witch, then be a witch. As long as she doesn't learn the Book of Darkness, or absorbs the magic that has been corrupted by the Book of Darkness, she won't trigger the Sithorn mark in her body to become a Scarlet Witch. Again, Russell has his own ideas. Since Sithorn can do it, can he also give Wanda a magic mark after he is strong in the future, so that the other party can become his subordinate? So what kind of witch will Wanda become? Anyway, he's looking forward to it. Wanda spent the rest of the afternoon by Russell's side, making small moves from time to time on the pretext of learning knowledge. It wasn't until late afternoon that Russell made an excuse to go next door. At least Wanda doesn't want to eat the food he cooks now. It's almost like the Dark Witch cooks. He was even already thinking about whether to make a magical maid butler out so he didn't have to face the dark cooking. After a simple meal at Wong's place, Russell asked, "I didn't find a way to awaken the witch's ability in the Library of Karmatage, do you know what not to do? Wang wiped his mouth and said, Harm, you asked me earlier, I thought you didn't want that little witch to awaken. You know that Greenwich Village 2 streets away? Russell nodded, his eyes lit up, I know, how can there be a way? Nope. Looking at Russell's wrong gaze, Wang Wuzi hurriedly said, there is also a Greenwich Village in Wiltshire, the Scottish island, where a large number of witches live. And there are monthly gatherings there, and many wild mages, as well as some small families that have broken their inheritance, will go. If there is a way to awaken witches, it is there. Episode 67, Wiltshire, where the weather is cold and damp all year round. But for some reason, the clouds dissipated today, and a bright sun hung high in the blue sky, emitting warm sunlight. Russell was wearing casual clothes and sunglasses, while Wanda was holding his arm in a yellow dress with broken flowers. The two were like an ordinary couple of tourists, following the crowd towards Stonehenge not far away. 3 days had passed, and Russell had not rushed to Greenwich Village, but had taken Wanda on a trip to the island of Scotland. Occasionally enjoying life is still very pleasant, not to mention that there is a big beauty by his side. Wanda is even happier, longing for life dreams come true, not to mention the side. She secretly glanced at Russell, now she has no objection to carrying her arm, won't it be in the future? The more Wanda thought about it, the more she blushed. Soon, the two came to Stonehenge, and there were already guides talking endlessly on the side. According to archaeologists, Stonehenge was built before 2300 AD, with stones 6 meters high and a single piece weighing 30 to 50 tons. They guess that it was built by the ancients using piles of earth to worship the gods. The front is still very serious, and the person in the back pushes his glasses and quips, but if I were to say, maybe this was done by aliens, in order to make humans scratch their heads. Hearing this, Wanda looked at Russell curiously, and she remembered that the other party had told her that the gods on the Nordic side were aliens. Maybe Stonehenge was really built by aliens. Russell shook his head slightly. Not aliens? Wanda was a little disappointed, and it was not interesting for the mysterious building to lose its mystery. But the next moment, Russell laughed again, probably built by a witch or mage, this is a magic seal. In Russell's eyes, the entire Stonehenge is built on a small magic node, not knowing whether it is a sealed passage or a monster. At this time, a middle-aged man dressed in a suit seemed to hear something, and after approaching, he tentatively asked, "This friend, are you going to Greenwich Village too?" Russell wasn't surprised, it was very close to the place where the witches gathered, and it was too normal to meet some wild mages. However, the man in front of him is also too miserable, and the magic in his body is almost imperceptible. I just want to try my luck. Russell smiled back. Who isn't? The caller showed a wry smile, and then said in a tone of pity, "It's more difficult for a small family like us to use a trick, so let's see if there will be any windfall at the witch assembly." Then this person was very familiar, as if he had finally found someone to talk to, and he was bitter. But as he said that, Russell noticed that something was wrong with the taste. The middle-aged man in front of him first said how miserable he was, sold the magic book at home, and was oppressed by the witches. But by chance, he met other mages, cultivated magic with the help of the other party, and learned several spells. Until the end suddenly, the conversation changed. "Brother, are you interested in joining our Mage Mutual Aid Association? Free help learning magic." Russell felt a strong smell of C-pins, but still pretended to be interested. "Is it really free? Aren't there any membership fees or something, like gold coins, magic crystals?" The man shook his head vigorously, and said very enthusiastically, "Don't worry, absolutely nothing will be charged. For so many years, everyone has been squeezed too hard by the witches group of bitches, and this is why the organization was established. The essence is to help each other, how can you collect things?" As if to dispel Russell's concerns, the man quickly spoke again. "Tonight, there is an adult who has mastered advanced spells to explain spells for free, and the opportunity is rare, you can come and listen to it." Russell was a little surprised to hear this, and it seemed that it was really free. But he still didn't quite believe it. As the saying goes, free things are the most expensive. But now that the witch assembly is still a few days away, it's good to go over and see how the low-level mages are living and relaxing. Russell made an excited gesture and nodded. "In that case, I'm bothering you." The middle-aged man suddenly laughed even more. "No trouble, no trouble. Everyone is a wild mage, as it should be. By the way, my name is Will, what's your name?" Russell smiled slightly. "Just call me Constantine." Only 20 kilometers away from Stonehenge, Russell saw the so-called Mage Mutual Aid Society here. Pass through a very rudimentary expulsion enchantment, inside which sits a huge, circus-like tent, connected to each other. At this time, there were many people inside, some dressed no different from modern times, and some wearing retro robes. Others sell things in front of their tents. The man named Will took the two to an uninhabited tent and left, saying only that he would wait until 8 o'clock in the evening to go directly to the largest tent in the middle. At that time, there will be mages there to explain the knowledge of spells. Russell didn't care either, and took Wanda around the settlement. What a shriveled sheep fetus, a dried frog, a fake mysterious magic codex, a synthetic crystal ball, an ancient totem freshly made last week. What's even more outrageous is that Russell also saw voodoo puppets that may have come from a small commodity wholesale market on a distant side. It's outrageous. And except for a few mages who can catch up with Karma Taj apprentices, most of them have only weak magic power, and whether they can use spells or not is a matter of opinion. Are the low-level wild mages all mixed up so miserably? Just such a group of people helping each other? Episode 68. But since he came, Russell decided to see if the one in the evening could have any surprises. At night, before 8 o'clock, most of the wild mages arrived impatiently at the largest tent in the center. Until 8 o'clock arrived, a woman wearing a magic robe and holding a magic book walked out. There was a sudden silence in the scene. The woman smiled and nodded, did not say any nonsense, and directly began to explain a magic that summons fire to attack the enemy. From spell construction to how mana works, what spell syllables trigger mana, and some of the techniques are explained in great detail, all the wild mages below are mesmerized. The female mage spoke in detail, and although Russell seemed to be a little verbose, there was no big problem. Just when he thought that this mutual aid meeting was indeed real, that he was a gentleman's belly with the heart of a villain. The woman who finished speaking the spell spoke. I have been explaining the spells for 3 days, and 3 spells are enough for you to learn for a while. So tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the evening, I will lead everyone to a small magic node to teach everyone how to better absorb the free magic from the outside world. Hearing this, all the wild mages were excited. Compared to spells, what they lacked more was mana. Russell also laughed and applauded, but he was sneering in his heart. Early the next morning, Russell left with Wanda. He won't spend his day here and planned to visit again in the evening. And seeing him leave, the man named Will narrowed his eyes slightly, and then got into a tent. In the middle of the tent sat a woman, none other than the female mage from last night. Sir, there is a wild mage who has left, do you want me to capture him? At this time, there was no enthusiasm and kindness on his face, some were just gloomy. The woman shook her head. The witch assembly is approaching, the number of wild mages who have been deceived these days is enough, don't make trouble. If you do your job, I won't treat you badly. Will had excitement in his eyes, his dream of an archmage was about to come true tonight. Soon it was 8 o'clock in the evening. Inside Stonehenge, the female mage sits in the most central position, and hundreds of wild mages around her absorb the magic that freezes in the air with the help. Everyone showed a greedy look at this time, feeling an unprecedented sense of K. And on the stone beam of Stonehenge, Russell squatted on it and ate watermelon and shook his head slightly. All the people below are polluted by the magic here. On the surface, the female mage was helping everyone absorb the magic power, but in fact, it was like a source of poison, and the relatively rich magic power here was mixed with filth and let these mages absorb it. Russell is not the virgin, this group of wild mages are carried away by greed, and he will definitely be resented for killing the female mage. And before his arrival, these people had already begun to absorb the magic power, and they couldn't save it if they wanted to. Moreover, even if they know that the mana is contaminated, these people may not stop in the face of the rapidly growing mana in the body. At this moment, the female mage suddenly stood up. She directly took out a dagger and cut her wrist, and blood flowed towards the ground. And those mages who were still addicted to the sense of magic growth K also had wounds on their wrists, spraying scarlet liquid. But these people were unmoved, or unaware. Soon, these mages turned pale and fell to the ground with a smile on their faces. In just a dozen seconds, they were drained of blood. On the ground, a magic array emitting bursts of scarlet light had appeared. Seeing this, the female mage in the center of the magic array showed an excited smile. She knelt directly on her knees, stretched her arms, and chanted the mantra loudly in her mouth. In an instant, countless screams sounded. One by one, purple twisted souls emerged from the corpses on the ground, constantly sinking towards the ground. The earth began to tremble, and all the boulders that made up Stonehenge began to crack, and they were getting bigger and bigger. Hundreds of kilometers away, in Greenwich Village, Fiona, the leader of the witch and the leader of the Inquisition, woke up from meditation in an instant. When she opened her eyes, she saw that the candles around her were extinguished, and a stone totem on the desk cracked. Fiona's face changed suddenly. How could the Stonehenge seal break? Isn't Luna guarding there? But the time was urgent, she didn't have time to think about it, and quickly picked up a bell and shook it. In an instant, the whole village became noisy. A dozen seconds later, a whirlpool appeared above Stonehenge. Fiona flew out of the vortex with 24 witches in a hurry. But everyone's face changed drastically. They watched as Stonehenge shattered and a huge palm broke through the land. Seeing this scene, Fiona's body shook, and she almost didn't control her magic power and fell from the air. After being held up by a witch, she looked angrily at the female mage floating in the air and shouted, "Luna, you actually betrayed the witch, you will kill everyone." The female mage, Luna, laughed hysterically after hearing this. "That seat should have been my seat after my mother died 7 years ago. Now that even Agatha is dead, you still don't step down, greedily occupying all the benefits. Now as the leader, I see how you protect the other witches." Saying that, Luna's face was crazy, and she looked at the cracked earth below and shouted, "Ancient Titan, as your releaser, I beg you to kill this group of slut. Their flesh and blood are rich in magic, and their spirit bodies are tough and moisturized, which has a huge effect on your recovery." At this time, as if climbing outward from the cracks of hell, the giant covered in magma showed a hideous and terrifying smile. "As you wish. I will kill all the witches." And this world, Fiona and other witches looked extremely desperate. This flame titan is not an existence they can resist at all. Today's witches are neither as powerful as in ancient times, and their numbers are pitifully small. This time witches are really going to be history. Rumble. The ground trembled again, and the giant of hundreds of meters had already pulled out half of his body, and the terrifying lava body made all the witches unable to even get close. But at this moment, the giant suddenly stopped climbing. A few seconds later, the slow-moving giant suddenly howled in horror, and then returned to the same way to drill down. "Abominable witch, tens of thousands of years have passed, you are still so despicable. It's actually eaten me. Despicable." While cursing, the giant quickly drilled down into the crack, and a large amount of dirt was overturned. For some reason, at this moment, everyone suddenly felt the terrifying magma giant in front of them, like a groundhog running for his life. But how is this possible? At this moment, a burst of stars flashed, and a young man in casual clothes appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Fiona just looked at the man and looked down with ease and smiled. "Come here, don't go back." The next moment, the other party's palm gently aimed at the crack below. Suddenly, a huge purple magic array with a diameter of hundreds of meters instantly formed that she couldn't imagine. Then an indifferent voice sounded in everyone's ears. "Magic mysteries. Frost." Episode 69. For a moment, only the night of stars seemed to be wrong, and the bright moonlight covered the earth. But just a second later, Fiona, the leader of the witches, was shouting madly in her heart, "Crazy denial." It wasn't moonshine at all, but a cold snap that was so cold that it was terrifying. Where it passes, a silver frost-like moonlight forms, and the covered world seems to freeze in an instant. Suddenly, even though they were far away and did not touch, all the witches shivered unconsciously, as if their souls were shivering when exposed to the cold wind. At this time, in the huge crack, the flame titan seemed to have noticed something, and drilled down even more frantically. But unfortunately, that cyan air flow quickly caught up with it. The next moment, all the witches only felt that they were in a dream and saw a miracle. I saw the flame titan turn around and roar, and his body became brighter and hotter. The hideous giant mouth is like a volcanic eruption, spewing out raging magma and flames. But the high temperature that seems to melt everything by thousands of degrees becomes vulnerable when it encounters cyan airflow. The flames extinguished in the blink of an eye, and the tumbling magma solidified and turned black. Everything is covered with a thick layer of white frost and spreads downwards. The flame giant let out a desperate roar, but could never keep his mouth shut. After a dozen breaths, a huge, terrifying frost crack appeared on the earth. The cold wind was howling inside, like the nine cold hell, a huge statue of hundreds of meters solidified in place, imprisoned in perpetual freeze. The world became dead silent, and the witches in the sky seemed to be frozen at this moment. A minute ago, they were still desperate and terrified about the fate of witch extinction. And a minute later, the flame titan that seemed to be able to destroy the world was frozen forever by that mysterious man's wave. This extreme reversal simply makes everyone feel like a dream, with a strong sense of unreality. But as the icy chill hit from below, everyone shivered, and instantly woke up like a dream. The witches turned their heads in unison and looked at the man who was floating in the air as if he had just done something trivial. At this moment, they finally knew what the flame titan's reaction was before. Because after breaking the seal, it found humans who were far more terrifying than themselves. It wants to run away desperately, but unfortunately, it can't do it at all. Can't even resist. At that moment, presumably the fear and despair between them were the same. Fiona, the leader of the witches, wanted to speak, but when she opened her mouth, she found that her voice was so hoarse that she couldn't even speak. At this time, a scream full of fear suddenly sounded. Luna, the witch of the Flame Titan's releaser, turned into a thick black smoke and fled towards the sky. Fiona's face changed, and it was simply too late to pursue at this time. But the next moment, she saw that the terrifying mage just raised his hand, and in an instant, a dazzling lightning bolt pierced the night sky and instantly hit the black smoke. With a scream, the witch Luna fell directly from the sky to the ground, without breath. If outsiders had executed witches in the past, then she, the chief judge, would definitely not give up. But at the moment, she just lowered her eyebrows, not daring to say anything disrespectful. The same is true of other witches. However, as the leader, she always has to face at the moment, and she can't continue to stand so awkwardly. But just as she wanted to speak, she saw the man stretch out a finger that didn't speak. Fiona immediately silenced herself without the slightest dissatisfaction. Russell dialed the phone, and the other side was connected the other second later. Russell said succinctly, "There is a creature in Stonehenge in Wiltshire that I have frozen here, you bring someone over to deal with it." Hazard level? The danger level is now 0, and it is frozen to death. The intelligence level can be a little higher. Yes, you can build a base on the spot, and then see if there is any use value in dissecting. Do you need protective clothing? Bring cold clothing, you will get frostbite if you get too close. After a few words to Nick Fury, Russell looked at the witches and smiled. "I'll handle this stuff, are you okay?" Suddenly, all the witches' heads shook like rattles. Fiona said nervously, "No comment, no opinion. This is your Excellency's loot, of course you have the right to dispose of it. Besides, we should also thank your Excellency for saving your life." Although she also looked at the corpse of the Flame Titan, she did not dare to ask for it with 10 dares. Russell nodded and said, "I really have something to ask you for help with. Since you met in advance, you just got things done directly, and there was no need to wait for the witches to assemble." Fiona's heart suddenly mentioned her throat, but she still squeezed out a smile and said, "Just say it." At this moment, she only hoped that the matter would not involve the life and death of the witch, and she could agree to anything else. In the face of such a strong person, rejection is a luxury. Russell smiled and waved his hand. "Don't be nervous, it's not a big deal. I just heard that you have a way to awaken witches, and I want you to help one of my friends awaken." Fiona immediately breathed a sigh of relief. "It's simple. But let me tell you too, if the essence of your friend is not a witch, the awakening ritual is useless. A long time ago, witches mostly awakened on their own. However, the probability that a witch's child is still a witch is much greater than that of ordinary people, so a method has been invented to make witches awaken unnaturally. Of course, if the essence is not a witch, the ritual is useless." Russell nodded at this time. "You can just do the awakening ceremony, and don't worry about the rest. I'll take her over tomorrow, just prepare it in advance." Fiona nodded, seeing that the other party had no desire to continue the conversation. She took her leave and returned to Greenwich Village with a group of witches. As the portal closed, the invisible pressure disappeared, and the witches breathed a sigh of relief. Everyone looked at each other, and they all saw the luck of the rest of their lives in the eyes of others. Tonight was so horrible that the fate of the witch was almost cut off. Of course, the person behind is even more terrifying, and the powerful Flame Titan can't even escape in the hands of the other party. Then suddenly a witch exclaimed. Fiona looked at it, and the latter suddenly said with a shocked face, "I remember, presiding judge. The dark witch Agatha was killed by him, although the other party's eyes were full of golden thunder at that time, but the faces of the two were the same." As soon as these words came out, the scene fell silent again. Around Stonehenge, soon more than a dozen Kuan-type fighters and a large transport plane landed. A large number of metal instruments and substances were then moved. And Nick Fury rushed with Natasha and Steve to Russell, who was standing on the edge of the crack. Just now they saw a huge frost eye-like crack in the sky below, but they couldn't see deeper. Nick Fury tightened his leather clothes, and while surprised by the frost spell of his own chief, he asked, "Chief, is the creature down there?" He glanced down, but it was too dark to vaguely see a huge outline underneath, like a boulder. Russell nodded, flicked his thumb slightly, and suddenly a white ball of light flew into the crack. Only then did he speak. "How to dissect specifically, you just look at the decision, you don't need to ask me." It's a pity that he didn't hear the answer, and the three of Nick Fury looked at the terrifying giant frozen below and only felt that the three views were shattered. The world has opened the tip of the iceberg to them at this moment. After a dozen seconds, Steve asked in a hoarse voice, "What is this, Chief? Flame Titan? What about the flames?" Freeze. "Steve, your title of Master Tactician is fake, right?" Looking at the American team who was speechless with a shocked face, Nick Fury suddenly understood why Karmatage suddenly wanted to take over S.H.I.E.L.D. The world seems to be starting to become more and more terrifying, far beyond ordinary people can resist. But Nick Fury stole a glance at Russell, and felt relieved in his heart. Anyway, it's good that there is such an existence as the director standing in front. As for Carol, to be honest, when the other party did not return to Earth for 20 years, he gave up his illusions. Once there is really a disaster, the other party will not be able to come back in a short time, it is better not to expect. Episode 70. The next day, Russell took Wanda to the entrance of Greenwich Village. Outside the hidden enchantment, Fiona, the leader of the witches, wore a dark blue gauze dress and had been waiting for a long time with a group of equally dressed witches. When he saw Russell coming, he immediately greeted him with a respectful face. "Your Excellency Mage, the awakening ceremony has been prepared, all materials are done according to the highest standards, even if the awakening fails, it will not harm this young lady." Russell nodded, and Wanda looked curious. The witches in front of her were very different from what she had imagined, not wearing tall pointed hats, not holding black cats in their arms, and not standing L's on their shoulders. Fiona glanced at Wanda and read, and immediately knew it when she found that it was a beauty. She smiled even more and led the two of them into the village. As I pass through the enchantment like a transparent film, the scenery in front of me changes drastically. From the original plain, suddenly became a lush valley. It is flanked by rows of wooden houses of different shapes, and in the middle is a teal masonry street that leads all the way into the interior of the valley. Fiona introduced the surroundings with a smile as she led the two towards the interior of the valley. For example, the entire Greenwich Village is a street, and the first half is inhabited by the most ordinary witches. The houses built on the mana nodes are either meritorious or have served on the Inquisition, or they are prominent in potions. Then when you walk to a circular square, there are some special shops, auction houses, trading halls, and mission halls. Of course, there is also a very large tavern for some travelers. As for how much money, Russell guessed that it definitely wouldn't be cheap. He could easily sense that there were more than 24 people in the hotel. And inside the hostel. At this time, these people in the room were secretly watching through the gap in the curtains, wanting to know what kind of big man had arrived, and they wouldn't even let them go out. Even today, all transactions, tasks are closed. Many were also evicted and prevented from entering the village. And now, these people were surprised to find that it was just a young man and a girl. At the same time, what shocked them the most was Fiona, the leader of the witch guild who was high before and could not see her once a year, not only accompanied her, but also deliberately lagged behind half a position, with a bunch of smiles. This is simply outrageous. In the square, Russell of course found that some people were secretly watching him. However, he did not do anything to deter or let the witch leader solve it. He is not so impersonal, and besides, he is not out of sight, and he competes with a group of small shrimp. Soon, led by Fiona, the two came to a 5-story minaret deep in the valley. Next is the witch awakening. First, the two took Wanda to bathe, and then wore a black veil-like costume to the top floor. Russell did not intend to wait below, and also came to the top, but the witches did not dare to say anything. Then he saw Wanda drink an herb and sit cross-legged in the middle of a 6-pointed star magic array outlined with white powder. Each of the 6 witches wears an animal mask and then sits on the tip of the hexagram. The next moment, overlapping chants sounded, and the magic of the 6 people transformed into 6 animal forms, chasing and flying at a rapid speed in a circular trajectory. As the chanting in the witches' mouths began to become faster, the white bone powder on the ground began to emit bursts of orange light. After that, the pace is slower. After a full 10 minutes, the syllables in the mouths of the 6 witches began to change, and the circular trajectory of the flight of the 6 magic animals above began to compress towards the center. Until the end, 6 animals collided. In an instant, a magic power with a unique frequency trembling was born, and then turned into purple mist and drifted downwards. Wanda, who had no feelings, trembled violently at this moment, and her cross-seated body automatically floated. Outside, Fiona immediately smiled at Russell when she saw this. "Congratulations, Your Excellency, Miss Wanda is really a witch." Russell nodded, of course he knew. But at this moment, he cares about Wanda's ordinary form, or directly promoted to Scarlet Witch. At this time, Wanda, who was floating in midair, burst out scarlet magic, and the pupils of her eyes also turned crimson. Ah! Wanda only felt a force born from her body, so that she couldn't help but shout out loud. It was at this moment that the terrifying red magic burst out, expanding outward like a shock wave. In an instant, the 6 chanting witches flew directly upside down, the entire spire trembled, and the enchantment that wrapped Greenwich Village flickered non-stop, as if it would collapse at any moment. Fortunately, this impact came and went quickly. The red magic on Wanda's body has ceased to overflow, and her body has fallen back to the ground. Russell looked calm, and Wanda did not directly evolve into the Scarlet Witch form. This is correct as he guessed. As long as he does not absorb the magic that has been corroded by Sid Horn, the imprint in Wanda's body will not be touched to evolve. And according to that force, although Wanda's ability is not up to the level of manufacturing Westview Town, it will not be much weaker than during the Women's Federation. Specifically, I need to go back and experiment. However, I don't know if it was an illusion. He felt that Wanda's body seemed to have increased by a few centimeters, and some places were more propped up. Just as Russell was comparing the sizes in his mind, Fiona stood up tremblingly. She looked at Wanda with a look of shock and ecstasy. High Witch. You actually became a High Witch just after awakening. What is your innate ability? Do you want to join us witches? We will do our best to train you. Syllable. Russell snapped his fingers, instantly shattering Fiona's illusion. Fiona's face turned pale suddenly, and she quickly apologized. I'm a little excited. But Miss Wanda's talent is so good, I couldn't hold back it for a while. After speaking, Fiona smiled bitterly in her heart, but unfortunately, she didn't meet Wanda first, and now she doesn't have the guts to grab it now. And at this moment, she still had a kind of rejoicing in her heart. If there was no Luna's rebellion, once the other party came to awaken with Wanda, he would definitely rob people after that. And the consequences of doing that are likely to be catastrophic. Just then, Fiona heard Russell speak again. Although I won't let her join you, I plan to hire a few witches as Wanda's teachers and teach her some spells and knowledge about witches. As for the reward, you can set it. Fiona did not hide the surprise on her face and shook her head. No need at all, it's our honor to teach Wanda. Russell took a deep look at Fiona, not piercing the other party's careful thoughts. As long as the other party can teach Wanda without reservation, then it is no problem to help if you encounter difficulties here in the future.